What exactly is dead money, and why is Ole Miss so high on the list of money that is paid out? We'll explain that right after this.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Willis. Thank you very much for tuning in, and thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So do us a favor. We're in the home stretch. We are over 950 subscribers, so the next time you hear about a subscription note, we will actually hit our goal. So our goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers before football season. That's going to happen. It's June the 7th, and we are where we are. So do us a favor, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you haven't, subscribe. If you have, tell a friend and get them to subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications every time we release a new video, which happens quite frequently. And of course, upvote the video itself. So if you do that, we'll be very grateful. All right, so I'm sitting here reading this. The new Lindy's is out. And going over there, and Ole Miss is popping up fourth on the list for what they're calling dead money. What do they mean by dead money? Dead money is money that has been paid for buyout. So if Ole Miss has recently paid $20 million, that's because they are buying out coaches. I think that is more relevant than people are willing to admit. The Matt Luke stuff was expensive. What happened in that Egg Bowl, in the immediate aftermath, kind of changed some stuff, and that's the reason they ran him off, and that is the lion's share of this buyout number. So you look at the list. Auburn is at the leader with $31 million in dead money. That's to buy out Gus, obviously. Nebraska at $25.8 million. They're getting ready to buy out another coach if Scott Frost doesn't turn it around. Texas, $21.5 million. Kansas, $20 million. LSU, $16.9. That's the Coach Orgeron buyout that was this past year. Texas A&M, $10.4 million. USC, $10 million. Washington, $10 million. But Ole Miss is at $20.4 million. That's a lot of money. And if you look at the other schools on this list, I'd say besides Kansas, but even Kansas in basketball can probably rake in money pretty well. A lot of these schools have money, a good bit of money. And say what you want to about Ole Miss. Ole Miss is not the wealthiest school out there. It's going to struggle to compete pound for pound in the NIL game, in the league that they are in. Going up against Texas A&M, going up against Texas, going up against those guys is going to be difficult for Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss can compete for high school recruits for 10 or 11 recruits. If you pull all the money together for a whole recruiting class and just pull it up to 11 players, Ole Miss can compete with those guys and go pound for pound with them. And it's going to be important that you evaluate correctly and things like that. But Ole Miss is not going to be able to do a full NIL class the way with Texas A&M. They would not win that. They do not have the money to do that. And this dead money means they have even less, if we're going to be honest. So this leads me to a question to you guys, and you can put the answer down below. Would you buy out Mike Bianco and change coaches in baseball if that meant that you would not get Jaden Rashada? None of these have been said. This is just a hypothetical question. But it is money that's coming out of the same pot. If you buy him out for $4 million, that's $4 million that you have less over here because it's not extra money. I say that over and over again. It's not extra money. It's all coming out of the same pot. So would you be able to fire Mike Bianco at $4 million? We'll say $4 million. And because of that, miss out on Jaden Rashada and all of that with him. So, because that would probably be likely because it would bring the NIL money even down a little bit further. Because like I said, this is not extra money. And everybody that wants to donate $20 a month, $30 a month, and do all that, yeah, it might add up eventually to be able, you can get maybe one kid every 4 or 5 years. But the big donors are going to be the ones that are actually toting the water on this. And I just thought it was interesting to think of with all this dead money. And this is money that, we can't go back into that well again. We needed the situation with Matt Luke to work because we would have more money. We would be in a better position right now if the Matt Luke situation would have worked, but it didn't. So we hired Lane Kiffin. To get Lane Kiffin, we hired him at a relatively reasonable salary. I'm not getting on Keith Carter even a little bit with that. Now it's up though close to $8 million a year, which is the highest paid coach in Ole Miss football history. It's almost at the point where Lane Kiffin needs to leave on his own volition if he wants to go anywhere, because Ole Miss won't be able to fire him. Not that they would. I'm not saying anything like that. But when you look at dead money, the contract's going to get rolled over every year. If it doesn't, you're looking at 3-year salary at a minimum. You're looking at $25 million to make a coaching change. So I hope he is successful, because it's almost at the point where Ole Miss cannot afford him not to be. You got to be right on him. But if you're right, he's going to go on his own, and he's going to put you in a hole either way. So he's, 6 of one, half a dozen of another. Mike Leach going to go through the same thing. He's making $5 million a year. If they roll him over and do all that, it's going to be between $15 and $20 million for him to get let go, if he gets let go. And a couple more egg bowls, and he probably will, because they will not really stand for that. It just is what it is. So, don't you love a chewy chocolatey brownie? I know I do. What about a caramel brownie with caramel swirled on top? So good. What if I told you can have all of the chewy chocolatey deliciousness plus 17 grams of protein? You're in luck, because caramel brownie bars are available at Built.com right now. You got to act fast because they're a fan favorite. Forget about dessert. These are better than dessert. Plus the macros are unreal. 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, 4 grams of sugar. I would replace a regular brownie with Built's caramel brownie bar in a heartbeat. So here's the offer. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15, all one word, for 15% off at Built.com. Hey, we have an important favor to ask of you. We've put together a survey so we can learn more about listeners like you and make your favorite Locked On podcast even better. This is your opportunity to tell us what you like and what you don't like about Locked On Podcast. Go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey right now to get started. It won't take very long, and everyone that completes the survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take our audience survey, go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey. Thanks for your help. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Anyway, okay. I mentioned earlier that I got the Lindy's College Football Edition, and that's where I saw the feature on dead money. And there's also a thing in there about the big games of the year. And these are the games that they are considering big games to I guess on the national landscape, and these are the ones that will involve Ole Miss, as they would. And it looks like there's only 2. That's November 12th versus Alabama, which will be a huge game. And on Thanksgiving night against Mississippi State. Those are the 2 games that are showing up as must-see TV to the random college football fan. And honestly, I can't really say they're horribly wrong. I think the Texas A&M game has a chance to be fairly special, not so much now after Nick Saban and Jimbo got into a little slap fight, but they do have a chance to be, special, being a lack of a better word. It could be a special game. But the Ole Miss Alabama game has a chance to be CBS. Vaught Hemingway absolutely rocking. Ole Miss is probably 6-3, 7-2, 8-1. somewhere in there. And Alabama's going to come in, and Ole Miss has the weapons, because the weapons have been put together. I always talk all the time on this show about the incredible transformation of talent on this roster. It's like 34 4-stars in high school as opposed to 17 last year. It's almost doubled. So that increases your blue chip. This is to get ready for the Alabama game. That's what that's for, the Alabama game. Everything's building to that moment. Sure, A&M's going to be tough. LSU's going to be tough. Kentucky's going to be tough. Hell, Auburn's going to be better than we think they are. So coming down the conference list, you're going to see teams that could be tough. But this is big boy football. This is about competing. You should be wanting to play the games against people like this. So to get ready for that Alabama game, hopefully Ole Miss at that point is clicking on 100% all cylinders. Now, DJ Durkin and Texas A&M, he's going to understand what gives the offense problems. He's going to understand that. Now, when you look at what Arkansas did against the DJ Durkin defense, who knows exactly how that's going to be. But we'll see how that game turns out. But the Ole Miss-Alabama game has a chance to basically offensively look like the Mac Corral 2020 game that, Alabama just was completely sweating bullets until a bad snap through everything. And the defense was awful that night. Now Ole Miss has a defense. So the game has gotten a little bit closer. And even though that game was, 62-48 or something like that, the game next year, which was 42-21, was closer. People aren't going to think it's closer because of the score and what happened. But how it played out, that was more of a close game than the early one. That was also a game that Nick Saban decided to play murder ball out of the blue against Ole Miss's defense because he didn't want to get into a shootout with them. That's important. That's big time news. So, Nick Saban, Lane Kiffin in Oxford. Should be a fantastic game. Should be a lot of fun. Set your DVRs, watch the game. Hopefully it's a night game. ESPN will have it, and it will just take off and be excited. The excitement will be palpable. But if it's a night game in November, that's about the same time when Ole Miss played Missouri, like in 2014, 2013 in Oxford. And that is one of the coldest games that I've ever gone to. So it can get cold in Oxford in November. Now, speaking of cold in Oxford in November, Thanksgiving night, Ole Miss Mississippi State. Mike Leach has something going for him and something going against him. Going for him is in year 3, Mississippi State, Washington State, Texas Tech. It doesn't matter. It's all turned around. Let's go. The air raid's in. Let's do this. What's going against him is he's lost like 9 of 10 against his rival. Everybody plays defense the same way. Everything is exactly the same. But you just have trouble going against them in rivalry games. So it's going to be interesting to see what Will Rogers and that team does. I know Makai Kapolk is, he's graduated. I think he's moved on. If not, I apologize. I don't follow Mississippi State all that much, but they have a chance to be a fairly good team. They have Antonio Harmon. They have all those guys. So they're going to throw the ball around the yard. And if you're not careful, you'll end up like Auburn did last year, where Mississippi State scored 5 touchdowns and 5 possessions or something like that and ended up woodshedding them. But if you are careful and you are good, it'll end up looking more like it did last year in the Egg Bowl and the year before in the Egg Bowl, to where the defense is just hard to deal with. And everything is thrown underneath. And Mississippi State has to execute absolutely 100% to hit it. and you just wait for them to make a mistake, and they do, because this is college football and perfection cannot be an actual standard that is strived for. You can't get close to it. There's going to be a mistake. There's going to be a holding. There's going to be a drop pass. There's going to be an overthrow. Offensive line's not going to be able to hold up. Something like that is going to happen on a drive, and it just makes it difficult. But I do say, Mike Leach teams in year 3 usually makes a run. I want to see what he does this year. They play at Arizona, I think, at like midnight one night. So that's going to be their Power 5 game. So their 4 non-conference game, they should go 4-0. But after that is a problem. They get Georgia this year, on top of Alabama and everything else. Kentucky is a good team. So that's probably the 2 top teams in the East they have to play this year. They get their natural division stuff. The only team that you don't know how it's going to work is Auburn. LSU's going to be all right. I mean, it might be 7-5, 8-4 all right, but they're going to be all right. And you have to go to Baton Rouge. And you don't have Bo Pelini lining up on the other side of you anymore. They're going to do all the drop 8 stuff that gives you all kinds of grief instead of 700 yards passing in a game. So it will be interesting to see. I mean, it is. Anyway, coming up after the break, we're going to hear from John Garcia, who's going to talk recruiting, Bryson Sanders, Jaden Rashada, all of those guys. He will have an update on all of them. And I think tomorrow we are going to do the thing where Derek Vandegrift comes on tomorrow, because we're just waiting to see what this game goes, because we want this series to be over and everything done, and then you can look and see what it feels like in the future, or it is in the future, or whatever, however you want to put it, going into potentially a super regional. Arizona might win 2 and Ole Miss could go home. Either way, we want some time for Derek to digest that and relay that information to you guys. That's the reason we're not going heavy on baseball right now, just because we want that to look as good as possible. So, John Garcia coming up right after this. All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes. Leave a 5-star review. You can say whatever you want to say. Just leave a 5-star review. You can talk about it. Steve doesn't know what he's talking about, but the guests are pretty cool. I think that would be pretty good. I'm here with John Garcia. We're here for recruiting. We're here to talk all about the magicness of Ole Miss football and everything's going on. How you doing, John?
I'm doing well. Big visit weekends everywhere. Ole Miss was no exception, of course.
Yeah, I guess the big news is the commitment from Roman Rashada, and what that could potentially mean. What are you hearing there?
Well, look, I mean, I think individually you look at Roman as a lengthy, versatile defensive back, and you should be excited if you're an Ole Miss football fan. This was not a shoe-in type of recruitment to win. Miami, Virginia Tech were certainly very high on the list among finalists, but once he took that official visit, Ole Miss really wrapped things up in a positive way for Rashada, who's got 3 years to play 2 left, coming from the junior college ranks. Watch his tape, man. He lines up everywhere in the secondary at the JC level. He plays nickel, he plays corner, he plays safety. So I really like his aggression at the nickel spot. They even utilize him as a pass rusher, believe it or not, at 6'3", 200 pounds. So a long defensive back, just like his younger brother, Jaden Rashada. And, of course, I know that's where a lot of the questions have been, rolling into. I was told that Jaden was back in Oxford over the weekend visiting with his older brother during that official visit. So, obviously, that's a big deal, because now you're talking 4 visits out of Jaden Rashada before he makes his commitment on June 18th. A huge deal relative to the timing. Ole Miss does have a quarterback committed in Marcel Reed, who we've talked about. But look, more and more programs are thinking about taking 2 quarterbacks, and it's going to be hard to envision any one of his top 7 schools saying no if and when he wants to make that verbal commitment. But, of course, it's not over in that regard. Jaden's going to be the most well-traveled kid in June before that commitment date. Not only did he visit Ole Miss during the week. He was at A&M during the weekend. I believe today he's already at LSU. He's going to go to Florida later this week. So he's really getting in as many trips as possible before that June 18th verbal commitment date. So you could almost start to craft any one of these schools as you start to carve out, where Jaden may very well end up. A&M was the only one that he hadn't visited prior to this past week. So now that he's got College Station experience under his belt, even though A&M was a bit later to the party in terms of offering Jaden. So there's still a lot of buzz, all over the place. I think A&M and Florida most recently have captured a lot of it, but Ole Miss is the dark horse here. It's the only one of the 7 schools that already has a quarterback verbally committed. So it would certainly be an upset if he ended up in Oxford, but obviously Big Bro's in town. They've talked about playing together. They've wanted to play together in college, if at all possible. And now with Roman off the board to the Rebels, that possibility for Jaden, it's got to be Oxford or nothing if they do want to fulfill that, that plan of being a package deal.
Yeah, and college football fans have an extremely short-term memory. And in case they don't know exactly what they're getting with Marcel Reed, take a few minutes to talk about him, please.
Yeah, I saw him in person again a couple weeks ago at the Elite 11 Nashville, and Marcel was one of the best quarterbacks there. I mean, he's a longer, younger prospect in terms of his physical development. I think he's got a bit of a ways to go from a developmental filling out standpoint, but the ball jumps off of his hands. He's a very good athlete. On top of it, very impressive baseball prospect, and that footwork translates over not only to his quarterbacking in terms of how he moves and manipulates the pocket, but certainly the ability to run and scramble as well. He does scramble to throw, which is a good foundation, but he can tuck and run it. Had 12 touchdowns last year for a really good program in Tennessee. So there's a lot to like about Marcel Reed, and for all these great quarterbacks we talk about in the class of 23, Reed has among the most experience of all of them. He'll be a 4-year starter before all is said and done, this fall. And that's really invaluable when you talk about the ability to play the quarterback position, because we can get lost in measuring height and arm strength and athleticism. And he's got good traits for all of those things. But that experience, that maturity that he carries himself with, I think will help him develop into a really strong player in the SEC, and this is the guy that Ole Miss was willing to take with Jaden Rashada still on the board, with Arch Manning still on the board, and I think that says a lot about a staff we should probably trust from an evaluation standpoint when it comes to quarterbacks with Lane Kiffin and company. So Reed was their guy. They jumped on it. He jumped on Ole Miss and hasn't looked back thus far. So a really strong foundation at the position, but obviously you can upgrade it with volume and add another big arm. That's a good problem to have, just like we're seeing with the Rebels right now on the field, right? With Luke Altmaier and Jackson Dart still battling this thing out for QB1 duty. That is a good thing for Lane Kiffin and company.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, just to keep going on this a little bit, a couple of weeks ago when you were on the show, we had a comment below, and I think I compared him to, like, if he completely maxed out, he would be RG3. And the guy said, no, he's not RG3, he's Charlie Ward. What do you think of that comparison?
I think, I was just talking about his maturity, that experience, almost a demeanor that he plays with. I think there's a lot more control in a Charlie Ward projection versus an RG3 projection. So I certainly like that. We mentioned he's a 2-sport guy. Now, basketball is not Marcel's other sport. It's baseball. But a lot of that translates, especially when you talk about his quick release and getting rid of the football from different arm angles. Something we saw again live in Nashville. He can really drop it. It looks a little funky at times, but the release is very fast. So it gets to its target very quickly. And obviously, if you watch Charlie Ward play, you heard a lot of, hey, this is unconventional, this is different, this is new, but it worked. And everyone, I think, still believes if he would have stuck with football, that he'd have had a long NFL career as a trailblazing type of quarterback. So to be in that stratosphere, I think, is a big deal for Marcel Reed. And yeah, I like that comp a little bit more because of the control and maturity along with that dual threat athleticism.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I saw that in the comments and I was like, hey, John might know something about that. Anyway, this weekend I think Bryson Sanders was in Oklahoma. There's rumors everywhere. People are dropping all crystal balls and everything else. Whatever service they're calling it, they think Ole Miss has a good good deal on that, but that Oklahoma visit always could sway. I think it was a big weekend up at Oklahoma. You know anything about that visit?
Yeah, so this was his last official visit, which is a big deal, right? Because now he's in total evaluation mode, right? He's committing June 23rd. That date has been out there for quite some time, and there's not a whole lot that has changed among his favorites, except for dropping one out. LSU is out for Bryson Sanders, so it's going to come down to 3. It's the in-state Tennessee Vols, the neighboring Ole Miss Rebels, and now Oklahoma, which got him on campus over the weekend, as you mentioned, for what they call the Champ U barbecue. A lot of these schools try to do non-football weekends to just bring more humanity and camaraderie and fellowship on some of these recruiting visits. So big barbecue in Norman certainly sounds pretty appetizing for an offensive lineman like Bryson. He loved it. He loved the change of pace from what's been a very busy visit and recruiting schedule. So I do think Oklahoma did about all it could to stay in the thick of the race. But I'm not sure if you're an Ole Miss fan, I'm not sure if you're more worried about OU and the recency bias of that visit or Tennessee, which is the in-state school that has begun to really turn up the heat for Bryson. There was a point there, Stephen, where we thought Bryson was for sure leaving the state of Tennessee. It was going to be Ole Miss, LSU, or Oklahoma. But since the new year began, Tennessee has really done good work in trying to keep him within state lines. He took an official. He's taken multiple unofficials over to Knoxville. So I think Tennessee might be the school to keep a closer eye on for Bryson Sanders. But I don't think he knows yet. I think fresh off of that Oklahoma visit, it's creating a little bit of pause. But as far as we can tell right now, no more visits are scheduled, and he'll take the next, 17 days or so and really sit down and try to make this verbal commitment. And look, Ole Miss got that first official visit. He said they set the bar incredibly high. He felt like a priority for a long time. I believe Ole Miss offered before any of these schools with him. So I think that stuff holds weight when you get closer to a decision as well. And look, Ole Miss really needs offensive line prospects from the high school ranks. They've done well in the portal and developing some other guys, but they need to hit on high school offensive linemen in this cycle. And he's arguably the top target out there for the Rebels. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, you were talking about Tennessee earlier, and if it gets to the third Saturday in October and Tennessee's actually good, like they're 5-2, that has the chance to be a generational type atmosphere up in Knoxville. It should be pretty cool. I like what they're building up in Tennessee. Tennessee people don't like Ole Miss. Ole Miss don't get along with Tennessee people, but they do have some good stuff building up there. Have you heard anything else from the official visit palooza at Ole Miss over the weekend?
Yeah, a lot of big official visitors. We've talked about a few, but Jonte Cook is certainly the headliner from a recruiting perspective, right? An elite, speedy wide receiver out of Texas. Most people really feel like it's a Texas versus Texas A&M deal, but he keeps leaving the state for visits and keeps the door open, And I think what's interesting about the Ole Miss angle is, he was scheduled to see Florida to take that official, and then he just scrapped it and flipped it for Ole Miss for this past weekend. And he basically relegated that to the consistency and persistence of Lane Kiffin and the coaching staff. They basically have stayed on him. They weren't even in his top 5 or whatever that he put out a couple weeks ago, but they continued to recruit him, and they were rewarded with an official visit. And I'm told in Oxford, it was all about Jonte Cook from the Lane Kiffin perspective. He got the photo shoot with Juice, which is Lane's dog that's now becoming like a Twitter sensation, and really got the red carpet treatment while he was in Oxford. So we know, look, Ole Miss is going to recruit in its niche, but there are certain positions and certain guys where they will contend nationally. And, just like we talk about at quarterback, wide receiver is one of those positions where Ole Miss can go out and compete with just about anybody to pull an elite talent. You sell the Elijah Moore angle because he's a smaller, faster type. I'm talking about Jonte Cook. And that stuff matters because these kids want to play on Sundays. It's about the NFL just as much as it is about NIL or winning, even, winning on Saturdays, winning for the school that you pick. A lot of kids don't really care about it. I'm not saying Cook doesn't, but the NFL is just as, if not more important than all of those factors. And that's, again, another avenue where Ole Miss has as strong a push and selling point as a lot of the schools on his list.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize, but when Lane Kiffin was at Alabama, this quarterbacks he recruited was Mac Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts, and the wide receivers was that whole group of Jalen Waddle, and he has an eye for exactly what he needs to get done in those positions. So if he's recruiting you, it should, even if you don't go there, it should be taken as an honor.
Yeah, and I think that was part of why Cook changed his visit plans. I don't think it was any disrespect towards Billy Napier in Florida. It was just, hey, Lane has been consistent, even when I took them out of my top schools, and they have something in particular to sell. So him getting back on campus, I thought was a big deal. He's a huge fan of Lane Kiffin. The kid's got a dynamic personality, just like Lane. That was a big deal for Jalen Robinson, the UCF transfer. When he committed, he said, man, I fit with those guys. And I think Jonte Cook is one of those type of dynamic personalities that Lane can kind of handle. You know, that's not easy for a lot of big-time college coaches when it comes to roster management. And Cook will tell you, I have a big personality. Remember, he went viral for basically saying Texas A&M doesn't have trophies in their football facility. So this kid is unafraid, to say the least. But again, those kind of personalities mesh well with Lane Kiffin. We've seen it in the past at just about every stop, and we're already seeing it at Ole Miss a couple of years in.
Yeah, and let's see, the 18th, that's about 12 days for Jaden Rashada, and about 17 to 18 days for Bryson Sanders. Any other dates we need to be looking forward to on the Ole Miss side in recruiting?
Yeah, I think, a lot of these kids are just trying to do it this time of year. So I don't have dates in particular. I do think that June is going to be a hectic month for commitments. There were like 35 commitments this past weekend at the Power 5 level. So kids are starting to really round third towards that verbal commitment decision because they want to get it done before their senior year. So folks like Sanders and Rashada have dates, but I think there's a whole group of kids that are in that same ballpark. They just haven't come out with a date themselves. I've seen two kids before we recorded today, Stephen, make commitments almost out of nowhere that nobody was expecting. So there's an urgency. There is a feel of pressure coming from some of these recruits taking visits because, look, spots are becoming limited at some of these top schools. And Ole Miss, again, coming off of what they did on the field last year, is in that territory, in that tier when it comes to elite recruits, feeling that push like, hey, if I need a spot here, I need to grab it sooner rather than later.
All right, John Garcia, thank you very much, the recruit expert on the Locked On Network. Anyway, thanks everybody for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Tune in tomorrow whenever we talk about baseball and get into what's going on in the baseball side of things and go on from there. So anyway, peace.